I understand that it's the highest grossing Sri Lankan film that has been made, and there are a number of reviews and criticisms and all of that. And in that respect, it's a great success because it's got people thinking about the individuals, but also about that era. Now, Asoka says it's a film that is fictitious, but it's based on fact. And indeed, you have Manorani, you have Richard, you have the natural representation of what happened and a fictitious one. Yeah. Secondly, I mean, apart from the physical similarities, whatever it is, I think Swarna does an excellent job of the character in terms of a mother who has lost her son and commits herself to public life. There are criticisms that Rani is always portrayed drinking and smoking. Now, that I think is really unfortunate because, yes, my aunt did drink. She would have a drink socially, and maybe after a hard day's work, she may have had a drink. A chain smoker and bordering on being an alcoholic is total distortion of what she was like. There is a particular episode in the film which I think is just totally out of character, and it's somewhat insulting. And that is when Richard comes downstairs after being upstairs with his friend, and she asks him, "Did you rape?" He would never ever have said, not in a million years. I think that's really unfortunate that that should have been included there. Why did he say, "Did you rape him?" I don't understand. You know, that's completely out of character. So if you do not know what that situation was like, if you didn't know the characters and you saw this as a film, isolated film in itself, then yes, because it blurs all of these divisions, I think it becomes problematic. Now, what is effectively portrayed is that climate of fear. Now, the other thing, of course, is that right at the end, you have them going to take Richard. And a lot of people have said, look, this kind of totally exonerates the UNP regime for his murder, because it's almost like these guys got drunk and they decided on the spur of the moment that they should take Richard. And surely we all know that is not what happened. You know. So in that respect, why does he do that? Why does he do that when the general public's belief is with regard to certain individuals being responsible for it? Now, is he trying to say that, look, this was a climate of fear in which anyone who had any authority could do anything? You know, that may have been his purpose. But it does come up against this notion that the UNP regime, which everyone believes was responsible for it, Ranjan Wijeratne and President Premadasa may be covering up or whatever, that is a travesty. You know. So overall, yes, we should have more films like this, but with taking into account, if you're going to talk about characters who people know about, etc., that you have some kind of resemblance, some kind of, action in Manorani's life, which didn't use their names, and so then it was a standalone. It's about the details and all of that, which are, in a sense, inconsequential, because it's about a film. There's a political message, and the political message is about that Dushana Bhishana period in Sri Lanka, and of course, I think that does come out. They actually use the names of the people involved. So, for example, I mean, like I said to you, the representation of Manorani as being someone who's always smoking, who goes to a kadeh and asks for, buys a packet of cigarettes, is all nonsense. He would never have done a thing like that. And almost every shot of Manorani, she's lighting up or she's having a drink, which gives a distorted portrayal. Now, maybe Ashoka did that because he wanted to emphasize the class. He keeps hammering it home. And I mean, there are little things about Soiza not driving and mother and son not calling each other, that they called each other Soiza and all of that. But that's by the by, But it's the one I said to you about the question of asking him whether he raped this guy, then also about she would not have done that. She was a very compassionate, caring human being who spent her life as a doctor in Suleiman's hospital in Borella, working with the poorest of the poor. In that respect, she was unpretentious. She may have come from a particular class of society, but to sort of suggest that she was some sort of socialite who didn't understand what was happening in the country, into a caring human being who, as she said, she was lucky. Her son's body came back to her, and therefore she felt that she had to commit herself to the cause of all the mothers who had lost their children. And, she comes from a family who, were engaged in public service. And it's not the sort of notion that she was some sort of high-flying socialite or anything like that, because it happens so often. Perhaps in order to show that someone who had a different lifestyle, etc., because of this terrible tragedy, decided to devote herself to something. We heard about, those who did not know about, heard about this famous TV presenter, actor, romantic hero, if you like, and the work that his mother did. But there is one other point that I would like to make. The general public in Sri Lanka is relatively politically illiterate about the past. For example, I was told that during the Aragala, in the nights we would have long debates about Sri Lankan politics, there was a significant minority that did not know what happened in 1983 or understood the significance of what was probably the most cataclysmic, catastrophic event about our past. Informing, educating our general public about our past, I think, is tremendously important. And the arts have a huge role to play in it, and that has been. But in terms of theatre, in terms of film, we need a lot more. Because, it's a rich mind. I'd like to think that whatever time it came out, it would have made that impact. But I cannot deny that we have an NPP-JVP government, therefore that creates a climate which fosters and encourages people to see films like this.
Her was like?
Well, as I said, she was a very elegant, beautiful woman who was very compassionate and very caring. As she worked with the poorest of the poor, she was concerned about their lives. And with regard to Soiza's wide dimension, in terms of wide circle of friends, she was always worried whether they had a medical problem or whatever. So at the end of the day, she was a compassionate human being, and she had within her the strong sense of defiance and anger to fight against injustice. People then get reminded of their experiences of having met her or having known her, and they get extremely upset about it. Yeah, so, a number of the criticisms, yes, do come from people who have known her very well, some of her relations or connections or whatever, and then people who'd come across her in the course of their lives and would have come across this compassionate, gracious lady who is nothing like, in their opinion, the portrayal of her. Anything that suggests that she was unremarkable. Everyone has written about how remarkable she was. But look, you come up with a story, a film, a play, or whatever, invite criticisms and compliments, please everyone. But the important thing, therefore, is that because it is a range of perspectives, you get a genuine debate, background. And so, things that would have been seen through the eyes of conventional wisdom as being unacceptable, etc., were not. As far as we were concerned, human beings could do whatever they wanted to do as long as they didn't hurt other people. I think that was I think it'll serve as some kind of historical archive of having noted that these things happened. Secondly, it can provide an inspirational value to a younger generation who recognize that there are so many things wrong in this country, and just sitting and watching it like an audience is not enough. That you have to be a stakeholder, you have to act. And that comes with risks, as in the case of Sosa. Journalists and human rights workers and all of that who feel like that. But it's a question of how many of them are willing to take the risk and accept that with the risk might go the sacrifice. That's with certain sequences, like I said, that rape thing, her constantly smoking, her constantly drinking and all of that. But she was an intelligent human being who probably, on reflection, would have said that, look, all right, there are various shortcomings, etc. But this film focuses and brings to light that Dushana Bhishana, mothers of this country were looking for the truth with regard to what happened to their sons, their fathers, their husbands, whoever. And in that respect, she would have said, yes, okay, it is a good film. But with regard to the details, the representation of her and all of that, I'm sure she would have had major issues. The thing is this, when you say brought to justice, look, she recognized that Ranjan Vijayaratne, President Premadasa, was involved in a cover-up. There was Ranchi Goda, there was Gunasinghe, and that they all came to an end because of violence of some sort. Yeah. There isn't a court of law that has said it is an unresolved case. The film, too, doesn't categorically and explicitly state that X ordered it. It leaves all of that unsaid. And a lot of people go away with this notion of, yes, you got a couple of drunk cops, etc., who were at, presumably it was Ranjan Vijayaratne's house, we don't know. And they found out that, yeah, boss doesn't like this guy, so let's go and do something with regard to it. And therefore, the regime that was responsible for the fear and all of that is exonerated. So in that sense, that question of justice, there is a question mark, because no one was convicted. But in the eyes of the public, there is this belief, strong belief, to the extent that it's acknowledged, that these people were responsible. And so many others did not stop. This was 1990. The war ended in that time period. Quite a lot. And there are mothers in the north, and indeed in the south too, but particularly in the north, who are still campaigning for the truth.
Yeah.
You know, I was the secretary of a consultative task force on reconciliation mechanisms. We went all over the country to find out what people thought about the Office of Missing Persons, Office of Rehabilitation or whatever, the Truth and Justice. We had public meetings as well as focus group discussions. One thing that will always stick in my mind was down in Mathura, I think it was Mathura, yeah. There were about 350 to 400 people there. And up in, I think it was Chalkacheri, at a public meeting in Mathura, people said to us, we know what the armed forces did here. We can imagine, therefore, what they did up there. You know, so there is, amongst the people of this country, whether it be financial corruption or other human rights violations, there is a need to have the truth out there. And hopefully, a film like that was involved in the Mother's Front, but I think she felt that the Mother's Front was perhaps too politicized. And then she started what was called the Family Rehabilitation Services, and where it was giving them assistance, etc., to get on with their search for the truth. And that is going to be a long, long fight. But fight they must. But in the meantime, they had to look after. It was inbuilt in her, but the catalyst, why we are talking about her, why Asoka made a film about her, is because her son was taken and his body was returned. And therefore she felt that she had a debt to pay. Different in the sense of conflict resolution, reconciliation. I think it has a tremendous role to play because it is bringing you in pictorially in terms of an image about how people have a common humanity, ethnicity, irrespective of religion. They hurt, they pain, they laugh, all of that is similar. And so it's showing that commonality and showing that if you come together, you can produce a much more productive and constructive result than if you are divided. If you look at the history of this country, in terms of the positive aspect, look at the independence movement, etc., all communities. In that respect, the arts has a lot to do in terms of raising public confidence, because the Mahajanatava can see the films as well. And there you are. There you can nurture. And it is important that the public in general get this into their perspective. Out to them, they reached out to her. That's the first point. Secondly, I think she had anger in terms of wanting to do something with regard to what had happened to her son and what had happened to her, and indeed what had happened to all the others. It was because of that anger that they found common cause. But she did it on human rights and humanitarian grounds. I think when she found that it could be exploited for political, partisan purposes, then she moved away and she started her family rehabilitation services, because her concern was the plight of the women. So it was absolutely romantic individual who was brilliant in school and all of that. And he, over the time period when the Jajavardhana regime and then the Premadasa regime were in power, he developed a very strong anti-establishment streak. And that anti-establishment streak was because he felt that it was authoritarian, that there were people who were left out of access to politics, to economics, the socio-economic strata. And so that, I think, was what compelled him, that strong sense of injustice, that the establishment was fundamentally, it was decrepit, at the same time it was unjust and autocratic. And so he wanted to change that. It was eliminated probably because, as you know, he was going out to Lisbon, to IPS, to head the organization or head a section of the organization there. And the conventional belief is that the international community would get to know much more about what happened and all of that. So yes, to a certain extent, it did help in terms of transforming things. Yeah. But I think, we didn't move to change things, because you had the Premadasa regime, then you had D.B. Wijayatunga, Chandrika, and then you had Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So we've gone forward, we've gone back, we've gone sideways, we've gone all sorts of ways, but not necessarily the right and stable way in which we have a society where this kind of thing does not happen, where there is no room for it, and where it is not encouraged and nurtured from above. So much the freedom of the press as conventionally seen in the past, it's about social media. That is where the real battles are being fought, where you have disinformation and all of that going on social media. So we have to knock our heads together and think of ways in which that can be regulated. But it's going to be very, very tough. And into the future also, we're going to have AI. So we kind of have moved somewhat away from that old battlefield into a new one. And this new one is, especially at the end of the day, he came from a particular class of society, and people of that class perhaps would not have stuck their necks out in the way that he did. And he didn't, I don't think, do it for a particular partisan political purpose, but because he was a romantic, he felt that he should do this as part of his professional ethos, if you like, apart from anything else as a journalist, because this was the truth. This was what was happening in this country. What would he have been like if he was alive now?